there are resources on the Teaching Council website that hopefully will support that, especially things like the frequently asked questions for tumuaki and principals. There's also that professional learning network. There's a piece for that, and the endorser guidelines. I think those are probably the three most useful documents for you as principals, as tumuaki. But I'm going to go through the huanga and look at sort of the main conversation that sits around them. So I've not got many slides, but I'll share my screen and then you can. But at any point, jump in and ask anything. Make sure that's the right screen I'm sharing, not my emails. Done that before. Yeah, so we're going to start, I suppose this visual representation of the whare o matatu, that place we can all meet, but for me, helps me to remember the PGs, the professional growth cycle in relation to those values, that pono, manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, and whakamana. So the professional growth cycle in particular sits within that whakamana value, where it's about building the profession up and providing that opportunity for us to grow as a profession. Previously, a lot of that work was done by external people. That professional growth was decided by your board, by your strategic direction, all of those things. And you as tumuaki were involved in that conversation, but it's not necessarily guided by where you want to go, what you need, but more around that strategic focus of the board. So that whakamana value that sits within the profession, this sits nicely alongside that, but it also provides that opportunity to enact whanaungatanga within the networks that you are working within. So you might already have a network that you belong to, but there might be new opportunities that arise out of this professional growth cycle for tumuaki and principals, and hopefully give you opportunity to establish new networks or to grow your networks you have with more purpose around that professional growth. The whare also represents that, has that huia feathers above the teko teko. So you've got your ako as the main focus above in that teko teko, with rauhuia above that, representing where you as leaders sit, but equally that we, like as members of the profession, we are all leaders and we can all look to that future. So being able to think about how you might, in your design of your professional growth cycle for you as a leader, how you can bring in your other members of your team in that process, so that you're starting to build that leadership capability within them. So I had an interesting conversation the other day with a tumuaki who was saying, well, I've got this money that my board had put aside to pay for my appraiser. So I've got this money sitting there that's been dedicated for that purpose. And with the professional growth network opportunity, it means that money might not be allocated in the same way it used to be. So looking at how they might take that board allocation for the tumuaki appraisal that previously was done by an external, how they might use that money to support their other team members, and that's provide opportunity for leadership development for them. Right. So a few months ago, we had Meihana Jury come and speak to us as part of that rauhuia conversation about sort of revisiting that whare tapa whā model. And I was thinking about it because we've been looking at how do we support our profession to be well, then to have oranga, to all of those things that we need as leaders. How do we support that with this professional growth network? And it's that intentional move away from a top-down model, I suppose, and looking at how, as a profession, we can support each other. Understanding whose wisdom we can draw on, whose strength can we draw on, who has a model that works that I could try in my career. It's those kind of conversations that can help support us across the network. And looking at what opportunity this provides for you. So that whaia te matauranga, so that growth, the professional growth, doesn't just feed us mentally, but it can help support us emotionally, physically, and support our wider whānau in that space. So it's bringing back that wider network that we can draw on. So the first huanga within that PGC is that principals will facilitate that common understanding, collective understanding of Ngā Paerewa, and what meeting them looks like in their teachers and their own practice. So if you have been a principal for the last couple of years, hopefully you will already have had this conversation with your teachers about their own understanding of the standards. You'll have unpacked the standards. You might have a quality practice template or a piece of work that you've done over time to understand what the standards look like for a teacher in your context. But it's about having that a similar conversation with other leaders within your context. Because the role of a teacher and the role of a leader, for some of you in a smaller school, it's a very difficult space because you are leader and teacher. And for a lot of us, that's where we sit, teaching and leading. So it's having a look at your specific role as a principal and how that looks for you to start to understand. So what does, for example, the whakaakoranga paere will look like for you in your context? If you are a teaching principal, if you have a part-time role, tumuaki 3 days a week and 2 days teaching, or if you, because you all have unique contexts that you work in. So you need to understand what it looks like for you in your role and have a conversation with other tumuaki, other principals to say, hey, what does this look like for you? For me, this is how it looks. How does it look for you? To start to build a collective understanding of Ngā Paerewa. And it'll depend, your context will, yes, you're all working in Ngā Kura a iwi, but you're not all working in the same kura. So how your teaching role, your principal role, your other leadership responsibilities might be different depending on the size of your school, depending on the net, like how you've got things organised. Kia ora, Cheryl. And depending on what makes sense for you in your context, that's why there's no sort of guidance around what the standards, this guidance in the standards document in the Paerewa around that elaboration, but it's not a concise list of these are the things you must see, because it's context specific. So how it looks for me is going to be different for how it looks for Annie, because we have different roles, we have different responsibilities, we have a different community that we work within. But I would still be able to provide conversation or examples or ways of working that I can show how I meet those standards. Those ways might be different, but the Paerewa stay the same. So, so who are the people if you needed to have a conversation about developing a collective understanding of Ngā Paerewa for you as principals, or you in your role as tumuaki, who might they be? Who are the people that you would have that conversation with?
Yo kai ako.
Kai ako.
Mahi.
Right. Who else might be a useful source for a conversation about understanding that context?
Well, first of all, Puari, I suppose, too.
Korero anō.
Oh. E tahi a te tumuaki tata ki a koe?
It can also include your ECE, your early childhood teachers and professional leaders within your community. And the same, anybody who's working in initial teacher education. So if you've got student teachers coming in, you've got ITE lecturers visiting, so there's opportunity to have conversation wider than just your own sector. Because you're looking at what does that look like for us. So in Tauranga, what might it look like in Maraenui? What might it look like in Porirua? You have opportunity to have that conversation with other professional leaders, so and other teachers, and it's about building that confidence and yeah, this is it's where that confidence sits. It's one of the questions we keep getting asked. Well, how do you know that what I think meeting the standards and using the standards looks like is meeting the standards and using the standards? It's by having those conversations with lots of different people, and you build that collective knowledge.
Linda, sorry.
Yeah, go.
He pātai tāki. So the professional growth cycle mo nā tumuaki, so because I'm a teaching tumuaki, so I have a separate one with the tumuaki and another one with the kaiako. So
No, you just need to have you just need to have one in your role as tumuaki, and that will cover your meeting and using the standards. But because you're teaching, you might be part of that conversation. So it's best if you're part of that conversation that your other kaiako are having.
Okay.
Yeah, you only need to do one. So I'm going to give you a to-do list. So this is your first to-do. So that's your first to-do list. So connect with other tumuaki, professional leaders or principals to understand what meeting and using Ngā Paerewa might look like in your practice. There's a great group of people right here. You could have that conversation with it another time, Julian. But it's also like it's just multiple opportunities to have that conversation. I mean, I've worked at the Teaching Council 5 years, and every couple of days I have this conversation with somebody different. So my perspectives shift quite quickly between, oh, I never thought about that. I never considered how that might be part of my practice that could be considered against one of the standards. And what somebody might say, oh, I do this, and that's me demonstrating my teaching standard. For somebody else, that's also your professional relationships might be the same. So you're looking at it from two perspectives, because for me, my focus might be on professional relationships, but for the classroom teacher, it's on teaching. But the same piece of same conversation might serve two purposes. So can start to think about who those kaiako, who those tumuaki and principals are within your community or nationally. They don't have to be local. You can meet with them anywhere. If you can meet with them online, if you've got things coming up and you think, actually, this would be a good person to have a conversation with, then yeah, touch base with them and make that conversation happen. So that's your first thing on your to-do list.
I'm just wondering if there's any principles here that have kind of developed a really good understanding of those paerewa. We've had some good conversations already with other tumuaki, other people.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet.
Because that's something else we can, I mean, I know somebody who's in this group, Annie Rolliston. Disappeared. I'm pretty sure Annie could give you a good hand with that one. I'll throw Annie into a little job. There you go, Annie, little job for you.
Paerewa, Linda, because Ngā Paerewa, they really are fundamental to the professional cycle, whether it's for tumuaki or for kaiako, and unpacking the Paerewa and understanding the intent of each of those Paerewa is really important, especially when it comes to looking at it in your own context, so long as the intent of the Paerewa is retained. There's a really clear intent there. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's quite good.
Yeah, and the depth, I think, is the other thing. Like if you look at design for learning, you've got curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, learner needs, learner strengths, interests, languages, cultures, and that's just in one standard. So if you think about what that looks like in your own practice and in your kaiako practice, it's a huge thing just to unpack that one Paerewa. So it's a good opportunity to start having more conversations as well about what growth would look like within those as well. So second huanga is principals and professional leaders will engage in professional learning using Ngā Paerewa within a professional learning network of colleagues to develop their professional practice. So who determines what that network looks like? You do. You're the experts. You're the experts. What will make it successful, though, as a professional learning network, rather than a catch up for a coffee or go into a professional learning session and then driving home, or is to make it purposeful. So being really clear in the purpose of that network. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be three tumuaki working together. It doesn't have to be massive. It can't be self-serving. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. So I can't say, hey, Julian, me and you'll meet. You'll say I'm doing a good job and I'll say you're doing a good job, and we'll be sweet. We'll sign each other's certificates and we'll have a coffee. That won't work. It has to be, well, professional would be the professional network, but its purpose is for learning. So it's that, I know that lots of tumuaki and lots of principals have the opportunity to have a mentor. So previously you've had somebody like evaluation associates, and they've got their plan for the year, and you have a very clear plan set out. This is what I'm going to do. We're going to do a workshop. I'll come and we'll have a mentoring conversation here. We'll meet together as a network here. There's nothing stopping you continuing that, but you need to have endorsement from within the network. So it can't be an external endorser. And it needs to be sensible and not adding more work. The whole point of this was to support very, very busy people to have a sensible way to approach their professional growth. We're not asking you to spend six hours planning terms of reference, memorandums of understanding, big plans about what a set agenda needs to look like. We're speaking about a few, 3 or 4 principles, up to 8 or 10 if you have to. That means less conversation for each person if the more bigger the network gets, but a small group, manageable group, and say we're going to meet this many times. But we've got these 2 hui coming up where we can meet face to face maybe, and the other times we'll meet online. And we might focus on this standard this time, or we're going to look at these 2 standards, or whatever suits you as the group. You determine what's best for you. And you might make a plan. What do we want to do? How long, how do we want to work this? Is somebody going to lead it each time, or do we want to get somebody in if we've got similar goals that we're working on, or similar issues that we're working with? we can get somebody else in to do that. That's okay. But it's purposeful and it's minuted in some way so that you've got, yep, these are the things we spoke about. This is what my next step's going to be, so that you have that to have a conversation about later in the year, because I know if I don't have something written down 3 months later, 6 months later, I'm going to be going, I know I met with Cheryl in April. What did we speak about? Instead of going, actually, I have my email that says, hey, Cheryl, thanks for the catch up in April. We spoke about professional growth cycle. And you were going to go away and unpack the standards with your kayako and make a plan for who your endorser was going to be from within your network. So having just that email trail will help you keep your remembering what your purpose was, but it will also then form your naturally occurring evidence to have that conversation at the end of the year when you're all busy and you got to that point going, I know we met at some point this year. I know we had a couple of meetings, but it means you've got some record to come back to. So yeah, formalized but not formal, I think would be the best way to look at it. But keep it simple, consistent, and sort of set, this is what we would like to achieve. Like, I don't want to spend more than a couple of hours on this a month or a term or whatever is what works for you, because you all have very unique roles. So there's no point in saying, oh, we're going to meet at 3:30. No, and find that 3 of the group have to drive the bus. And they'll be like, well, that's nice of you to meet at 3:30, but I'm on the bus today. Like, so it's that getting working in a sensible way that makes make sure everybody who is meant to be involved can be involved. And also, there's been a few questions about, well, what if we have somebody who we feel is the weakest link? Do we have to include them in our network? When there's somebody down the road and they're like, oh, here they come. Oh, they'll want to be part of our network now. Should we let them in? Should we include somebody who's not maybe somebody that I think is meeting the standards, because the way that they approach their thing is not how I would approach it? So again, it comes back to the values of the profession. Do we want to empower and lift up everybody? Or do we want to say, actually, we'll park that one on the side because they're in the too hard basket? We don't do that with learners, so we shouldn't be doing that with teachers, and certainly not with leaders. So it's looking at how we can support that network. And having a small group means that you can actually put that time into having a deep conversation with that person who needs a bit more time, instead of having 15 or 20 people in a room and that person doesn't get to grow because they're treading water. So
Linda, is it useful to engage a facilitator?
Yeah, but it's the thing, it depends on your network and depends on your purpose. If you have a group who would benefit from having somebody guide that process and manage that process for you, because that's one of the hard things is, oh, what are we going to speak about this time? We are going to have to make the plan. We are going to have to do that. There's plenty of organizations out there who can support you in that. And it's working with them, so collaborate with them to design that co-design of a process that suits you, because it's your professional growth network. But it might be that during the year, one of you hears about something exciting that's happening, you're like, we should get this person in to speak to our network. Then do that. There's nothing stopping you doing that. But equally, there's nothing saying you have to do that. It's up to your network. Yeah, so just making a plan, be sensible. And if you're using an existing network, like if you are part of a kahuiako, for example, and you've got these kahuiako meetings happening, and you're like, oh, this would be perfect. There's 3 teachers, 5 teachers here that I really, principals or leaders that work within that kahuiako, who I feel I can be open, I can really learn from. That's okay to make that your network, but again, formalize that part of it. So when we meet for kahuiako, we will put aside an hour that day to do PGC for leaders work, rather than just, oh, we'll meet in anyway, we'll just have a quick catch up about that, but be purposeful in that meeting so that you know that you have genuinely engaged in a professional growth network conversation about Ngā Paerewa, not about whatever else Kahuiako has got going on. So, to-do list, adding a new thing, couple of things to it. So you got that first one done, connecting with tumuaki to understand the Paerewa. Identify which learning network is going to be ideal for your own professional growth. And then identify an endorser from within that network. Have a conversation with them, not just go, I know, I'm going to get Julian to do that, and forget to tell him that he's going to do that. Get to have that conversation, which we've had before, going, well, I picked a really good endorser. I just neglected to have the conversation with them about, would you be interested in being my endorser? And then make a plan for the year. So having that plan means, as we all know, plans don't always go to plan, but it gives us a rough guide of when we're going to meet, and we try to stick to that as much as we can. But because you've got a small network, you have flexibility within that, rather than trying to get 100 people together. At the same point, you might be able to work around one another if there's other things that come up. And it'll also help you with the next piece, which is the next part. Principals and professional leaders will plan their Tupuranga Ngaio and share it with the presiding board or ACE employer. So previously, I've been on the board at schools a couple of times. You have your lovely strategic plan, and you've got your sort of annual plan worked out, and you have your professional development plan worked out, and the principal's goals will be aligned to one or two things, either to that strategic plan or to the guidelines that are set out in your employment contract. So because you're all working in different types of schools, although you're all Ngā Kura iwi, I'm not sure which collective agreement your role falls under, because it depends if you're in wharikura or an area school or a primary, or so yeah, you might have slightly different expectations for your role as principal. And previously, those guidelines that are set out in your professional responsibilities that are set out in your contract, you've got things in there like finances, building expectations, all of those things your board needs you to be across. That as a principal, you need to know that your finances are in order, that your staffing is adequate, that your roll returns are done on time, that you have a financial obligation to the board, and that you've got a financial report. Those things don't sit under your professional responsibilities as a member of the profession in the Ngā Paerewa. So previously you would have had, your board would make a decision about what professional development they needed you to do, potentially. And they would make the decision, and they would identify who, or employ somebody to be your appraiser. And usually that would be somebody who'd have previous leadership experience to support you in that annual appraisal. But part of the work that in the development of the professional growth cycle was that understanding of how, if, for example, I was I'll use Tupuna School as an example. So on our current board at Tupuna School, we've got an author, a biosecurity specialist, a kiwi fruit orchard manager, and a technology project manager. Those are our board, some of our board members. That's the skill set that they bring. Great for a board. But collectively, the knowledge of how to be a tumuaki, how to be a principal, is based on their previous experience from being at school or from being a parent at school. It doesn't come from a professional knowledge of principalship or of teaching. So we want, if you wanted to grow, if you think about other profession and their professional growth, if you had a doctor who needed to understand how to be a better doctor, you wouldn't expect them to go and ask a kiwi fruit orchard manager, an author. They would go and ask another doctor. That would be your expectation, that they would be growing and learning from other members of the profession. So similarly with the professional growth cycle, the expectation is that your professional growth will be with other members of a profession that you belong to. So that you speak to other tumuaki about how to be a better tumuaki, how to grow your knowledge and your skills and your behaviours that are expected against meeting the standards. That's done with other members of your profession. And I think that's probably one of the biggest changes in this. But your board need to understand that shift. Your presiding member needs to understand their role has slightly shifted. So previously, they would be sort of guiding that process in negotiation with you, whereas now you're guiding this process in negotiation with them. Yeah, any questions about that one? Because it's a little bit of a shift. All good. All right, so it's next step. Share your plan. So you've met with your tumuakis, your group of tumuaki, you've got a good understanding of what your role looks like. And having that recorded in some way will help this conversation you have with your presiding board member. Because you can say, these are the things that I will be demonstrating in my practice as a tumuaki. And you can see how they connect to these parts of my employment contract. These are the other things that sit outside that. So how do you as a board want me to demonstrate that? For example, the financial obligation, do you want me to just do that through my monthly report, and the annual end of financial year report that I do to the board? Is that enough? Or do you need me to do something else? Because previously you were writing, most tumuaki would have been writing a formal report. You've got your board report that goes every month anyway to your board meeting. And then you have your annual appraisal report, and you might have your professional development report, and you're like, well, how many reports am I writing for what end? Like, what is that? What benefit does that add to the board's understanding? Because I'm already speaking about it. It's already minuted. Do I need another report? Or can this document that I've provided with, this is the evidence I'm going to provide of these meeting these requirements for my employment. These meet my requirements for maintaining my practicing certificate. These are the other things, and have a conversation with the board. Presiding member, what do you want me to do with these things? Is there something else you need? Because what we don't want you doing is a whole lot of stuff for this, another lot, the same stuff, but shifted around for that, another thing for somebody else. It's trying to make it the least work for the most gain for you. We don't want you already busy enough to be spending time. We want you to spend your time growing, not your time talking about how you might grow. Yeah, just have good, deep conversations with other tumuaki about your practice. That's the key part. The best way to get better at doing things is to speak to people who know what they're doing. And the people who know what they're doing are you guys. So, yeah, talk to other tumuaki. And then, yeah, so share that with your board chair. And it might be, it might take a bit of settling in. That's okay, because it's been that way for a while, especially if you've got a well-established board who know this stuff. They know what they want for the school. They've got clear direction, clear vision. They've got a clear plan in place. And now you're going to come and say, well, you know, we had this great plan which involved this, this, and this. We look at it slightly differently. So it's just having that conversation, provide an opportunity to shift it around and help them to understand the professional aspect of growth sits with the profession now. Also letting them know who the endorser is, because they might want to have a conversation at some point with that endorser. It's not an essential part, but it might be, that would be negotiated with you again. But also if there were to be issues with your performance in relation to that endorsement. So if something happened that your endorser didn't feel they could provide you with an annual statement, or at the end of that 3-year cycle didn't think they could hand on heart say you'd participated fully, or you'd put you had met the requirements for moving, keeping that practicing certificate, your board should have been notified of that. You should have told them, as the person whose professional growth is in that space, you would have done that with your board and let them know, hey, my endorser and I have been having a challenging conversation, or I didn't realize I needed to do a whole lot of work in this space, but now we've started having conversations. I've realized I need some learning. Could you, as the board, support me with some professional development in that area, or whatever is required? So share your plan. This one, the feedback session, feedback space. Again, the feedback you get will come from the most important people. Tamariki. You'll soon know if you're doing a good job. Kids come to your office to tell you things that are great. That's a good sign that you're doing a good job. If kids are terrified to come to your office, maybe you need to work on your relationships a little. If teachers know that your door is open and that they can have a conversation and that you are approachable and knowledgeable and you know your stuff and you're there to help them, you're heading in the right direction. But if your staff are unsure that you know your stuff, you usually get found out pretty quick. You'll see, you know your teachers and you know your staff. So ask for opportunities, the same as you expect your teachers to be getting feedback on their practice. Seek opportunities for feedback. There is no requirement in the principles PGC to have observation of your practice like there is suggested in the professional growth for teachers. Because watching a principal run a whānau hui, for example, doesn't necessarily demonstrate that there's no way to know how that organisation was set up, whether everybody's on their best behaviour, whether there's been 16 or 20 conversations prior to that event. It's not, being observed isn't necessarily helpful for a principal. But if you feel that you'd like observation, it might be running a staff meeting and think, I really can't get my team to work in this piece, then ask one of your tumuaki friends from your network, one of your network people. Say, hey, do you mind coming and watching me run this? It's just never, it doesn't seem to work. Or ask for feedback from your board, ask for feedback from your community. And you're doing that already when you do your consultation and you say, if you've got any questions, let me know. They'll tell you, but it's seeking it rather than hoping somebody will tell you. So being again a bit more being purposeful in that, and speak to the board about how they would like to do that, because there's opportunity for the board to be engaged and involved in that, to support their decision making around your growth development. Just check my notes and make sure I haven't missed anything. Yeah, it might be worth as well having a conversation with your network around what that feedback might look like, how often that might happen, If it's to do with, if you've got specific things you want support with, then saying, oh, this would be really good if there's an opportunity for me to get feedback on this aspect. But like, for example, I've got, I am going to, like, I've got a workshop coming up on open to learning conversations, for example. And there's 2 other people within my network who've already done that PLD. So instead of waiting until I've done it to ask them what they learned, I'm going to ask them beforehand, what did you learn? And then we can learn something new, hopefully, because we've now got 3 people within the network who've completed that, tried it, and implemented it, and I can learn from that other network member. Or they might be able to come and support me by co-running a PLD session with my staff. So looking at how can that network start to build capability. And again, for that network piece, you can get somebody external. You could have an external person come in to provide you feedback like you have done in the past. That's okay. We had a lot of questions about evidence, because the shift away from that sort of portfolio model, collecting evidence to put into a portfolio, which would then be taken to your board, would be discussed with your appraiser. Then your appraiser would write a report, you would write a report, the board would get both reports, then they'd meet with you and discuss the reports. And that seems like an awful lot of documents and paperwork that is going to end up with a statement that says you meet the requirements of your obligations of your employment and are suitable to be signed off for your certification for your teaching practice. So evidence is used to deepen understanding about teaching and learning. Connect items, create new knowledge, draw conclusions, make informed decisions. It sits where it lives. Don't be making anything new. So you're not making a portfolio of evidence to share at your next PGC network hui. But you might have a piece of, like an article that you've read and you're thinking and reflections about that, and you'll bring that with you and say, hey, I've read this amazing article. You guys should read it. Or can we have a conversation about it? It's not about generating new things. It's about using what exists. So it doesn't need to be recreated or created. It doesn't need to be collected. It's in its natural location. So your strategic plan is your strategic plan. It lives where it lives. You don't need to then make a copy of it to bring and put in a folder for appraisal purposes, because you're going to be having a conversation about, this is my professional growth. It's come out of our strategic plan. This is where I'm thinking to take it next. The conversation is more important than the piece of paper. The growth comes from the conversation and the revisiting that conversation. We don't need you to have a portfolio of evidence like we used to be. Equally, the professional leader who's making the endorsement decisions doesn't need to have a portfolio of evidence. They'll have that same naturally occurring evidence that we spoke about. An email to say, hey, thanks for catching up on Tuesday. It was great to have a conversation about the design for learning standard. I'm looking forward to catching up with you next month when I want to hear how your open to learning conversations went. Maybe we can look at professional relationships next time we meet. So there's a quick record there. And you might have your own notes that you took, but they're for your use. Yeah, it's about you being able to keep notes that suit you, not having to create notes for somebody else's purpose. So you need to know what those standards would look like to be able to grow, to be able to teach and draw conclusions and make some decisions. So that's where your endorsement decision, I suppose, sits. So that collection of evidence not required, but there would have been, like, your endorser would have been involved in that conversation with you. That'll give you give them the confidence to say that you meet the standards because you've had multiple conversations through the year to reach that point. So you thinking about your current board and your current way of working, your presiding chair, is there, can you see that this will be a manageable process and reasonably easy to explain and support them to understand that shift? Any thoughts? That's it. I think this is the 4:30. The sugar in the coffee's wearing off. So it's gone. That's what's happened. All good. So the last part, and like I said at the beginning, I just have my black and white copy, but endorser guidelines are available on the Teaching Council website. I'll send Julian the link. So all that needs to happen annually is that confirmation that you've participated as tumuaki within that professional network, with professional learning network, and that you meet or are likely to meet the standards, meet Ngā Paerewa within that practice. So it shouldn't be a difficult decision for anybody who's been part of that network to make that statement, because you've been there, you've done the mahi, you've had the conversations, you've spoken about what that looks like in your own practice, and because you're coming from that shared understanding of what that looks like, it's going to be an easy statement to make for most tumuaki. The challenge will be if you have people who join that network later in the year or haven't. So there will be places where you can't make that statement, and that's okay. If you can't, it's not a huge, like, it's not the end of the world. It's just at this point, I can't make that statement. So for most, it's just that because you've got 3 annual statements before you come to the certification point. You have sort of 3 years of growth opportunity within that cycle. It's really just a simple statement, and it's important that you, as the person being endorsed, keep that statement, because if that other tumuaki leaves the network and you need to find another one, you need to have that. That's where your evidence might come in, where you've got a new person and you're like, I have to get a new endorser. I'm going to need to have this conversation, but you can say, hey, this is what we've been working on. We've met already to speak about these 3 standards. I've done this 2 workshops because that was what I identified as my growth, and this is where I'm at now. And they'll pick it up from there and carry on. Or somebody else in the network will be able to pick you up and be your endorser. So it shouldn't be like a major issue should somebody move on. But equally, if you find that your network that you've started with is just not helping you to grow, or you're like, just don't, there's something else going on in this other place which I think would grow me as a professional leader more, then you can move to another network as long as you change your endorser and make sure you're continuing those conversations. So yeah, it should be a straightforward decision. But if not, there's 2 options. So I suppose it depends on the reason for not being able to make that decision. If it's to do with timing or not being involved all the time or those kind of things, that's one thing. But if it's because you are not meeting the standards or not likely to meet the standards, then you should have been advised, your professional leader, your tumuaki, as a tumuaki, you should have been advised well ahead of the end of year annual statement to say, you're really not growing. You're not not engaged, you're not coming to any of the meetings, you're not, and when you do, you're not participating, or that the things that the conversations you have around how you demonstrate that in practice don't in any way seem to reflect any of the shared understanding of what that might look like, then that conversation needs to happen with the board involved. So the principal will not, what shouldn't be a surprise to the board at the end of the year that you haven't had your practice and certificate renewed. It should never be a surprise. They would know that long before, because they would be supporting you in your growth, in your development. And you would have highlighted that to say, my network has identified that I really need to do some work in relation to professional relationships, for example, and they've suggested that I do this workshop and this course. Could you support me with that? So that you get in that support. There's always that support there. So this concern should be clearly identified with specific examples, and they should have been discussed with the tumuaki in question with reference to the standards. So it's really clear, this is the standard, this is the Ngā Paerewa that the network have concern with you meeting or not meeting, as the case would be. And we, the teaching council, are always available to have that conversation. If there's a disagreement or I don't think they're right, they say I'm not meeting the standards and I know I am, then that's fine. Come to us and we can help navigate that conversation. If there's remedial action suggested, then the board and the tumuaki should know what is required and support. How is that going to be supported within the network, externally? So all of those things should be really clearly outlined. It shouldn't be any shock. And the professional leader needs to inform the board that that's what's going on, just to make sure we keep everybody safe. And usually the professional leader will work through a support plan at that point with the presiding board. So it's not the network's responsibility to ensure that tumuaki lifts their practice. The board will be responsible for that, but the network may support. So it goes back to that, goes back to the boards, and because they're the employer, because it becomes, when there's an endorsement issue, it can become an employment issue at times as well. So it's making sure that the board are kept informed. And so if it's in that first year, for example, of that cycle, you've got that other practice you've got opportunity to lift that practice and then be endorsed at the end of that next year. And that's fine. It might be just that the timing of that might be, this is something I need to work on. These are the things I put in place. And now I'm back to being a regular member of the network. And I carry on, and at the end of that 3 years, I'm endorsed. But it might be that this a more significant issue, which can be dealt with, and the council will support in that case. But there's far more information in that endorser guidelines, especially around when there's a difficult decision to be made. But the majority, I mean, when you think about the people in this room, and the people who are in the role of tumuaki, it is very, 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 very rare that any tumuaki would be in a position where they're not meeting the standards, because they're already a demonstrated leader. They have strong professional values. They already know their profession and the requirements of that profession really well, or they wouldn't have been put into the role of tumuaki. So it's a very unlikely scenario, but we've got the plan is there just in case it does become a scenario. So hopefully for you, never. But there's support there. And if you if you need to get in touch with the council, then just ask to be put through to the leadership team, and somebody will get back to you straight away. If you've got as a principal at tumuaki, if you need support, let the call centre know that you need support.